Can you guys see that? Somebody give me a thumbs up.
Yes.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming to our Modular Housing 101. The idea for this presentation kind of came out of a couple conversations we all had at the conference last year. Really just, we're in a state that doesn't have a ton of modular activity and a lot of questions and people kind of looking at it. It's kind of a hot topic as of late. And so we wanted to kind of give you guys a presentation that, just kind of gives you the basics of it and things like that. So we have three speakers today. We have myself. I'm going to, I can't get the slide to advance. What's happening? Well, that's useless. Hang on. All right, let me do this again. Screen share. PowerPoint share. Isn't working. Just resume slideshow.
Do you have two screens, Nate?
No.
Don't try to change
well,
it.
you know what?
Don't. I sometimes try to throw it onto a separate screen.
Are you seeing this or no? Do you see the
Yeah,
Nate
we're
Peterson?
actually we're actually seeing your
You're
presentation. It's
oh,
just not
okay, yeah.
showing it.
It's on my other screen, but normally I don't actually run a split screen, so it went to it. Okay, so you can see. Tell me if something's off.
Yeah, you probably want to put in presentation mode though, so we can see the full.
Well,
Because right,
oh,
'cause-
so I am looking at that on one of my screens. Hang on, I'm gonna unplug that screen. Is that better?
no. Oh,
Yep,
yeah,
there
there
it
we
is.
go.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Sorry.
Exactly.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Sorry for that. So I'm going to start out by talking. I'm Nate Peterson. I'm going to give us a little bit of the history of the modular industry in Colorado. We're going to talk a little bit about what Colorado's market share is of modular utilization. Try to really give you an industry snapshot of what our industry looks like in Colorado. And then we have Sam joining us from Division of Housing. Sam handles the standards and codes section in Division of Housing, and he's going to talk a little bit about what Division of Housing role is in modular housing in the state. He's going to talk through kind of the modular permitting process that Division of Housing administrates, the modular inspection process that DOH is in charge of, as well as some new items that we kind of have headed down the pike from a regulatory standpoint. Mo Miskell is joining us from Division of Housing as well. Mo's Deputy Division Director, and he's going to talk a little bit about what projects Division of Housing, what resources Division of Housing has, for modular housing, as well as kind of covering some of the modular specific projects that the Division of Housing has, funded and supported, over the last several years. And so with that, we'll kind of kick it off. And then at the end, I'm coming back and I'm going to talk about kind of some of the differences between manufactured housing versus building it traditional on-site construction. We're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of modular housing and the roles that the factories play in modular housing design. And then we're going to kind of wrap up with some resources for you guys in case you need to look into things further. All right, so again, I'm Nate Peterson. I've been in the modular industry in Colorado for about 18 years. And I own a company called Colorado Modular Homes, Rocky Mountain Home Builders. Just if you've driven up I-70, you have likely driven by our dealership where we are kind of our retail operation. It's right on Floyd Hill on I-70. There's a picture of it, down there below. And over the last 18 years, we've sold over $200 million of modular housing, pretty much to every corner of this state. And we've permitted over 400 modular projects, probably in about 50 different jurisdictions. And so we're definitely familiar with, the modular design and permitting process, as it is today in Colorado. We also do our own development work. And so we have just under about 100 housing units in various stages of development. some of them, middle income type projects, and for rent project as well. I have my A, B, and C general contractor's license. I'm a licensed installer for modular housing, something that the Division of Housing also regulates. I'm probably closing in on maybe 700 to 1,000 modular boxes that I've set in my life in the last 20 years or so. That's actually me in that man basket in that picture there on a project that was up in Granby probably about 2 years ago. That was a bunch of townhomes we put together. I'm a past CHAFA board member and been 10 years working with Division of Housing on their modular rules writing, trying to kind of help our industry. And so I'm a very big affordable housing advocate, which is really why, we wanted to put this together for you guys. And from a education background, I'm a mechanical engineer with an MBA in finance and accounting. Important to note, nobody's trying to sell you anything here. I run a retail sales operation and I do our own development work. There's really nothing I could sell you. I really just wanted to, as somebody who's an advocate for affordable housing, pass along, as much, information as we could about how we've been doing this for the last 18 years and some of the lessons that we have learned. So we wanted to start out by talking about what the difference is between modular versus manufactured housing, two terms that often get thrown around interchangeably, but there's some pretty big differences between them and just wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page. So manufactured housing is what a lot of people might, call mobile homes. They don't make mobile homes anymore, technically. They make manufactured housing, but manufactured housing is built to a building code that is managed by the federal agency, the HUD agency. And it has, kind of different building standards. They allow, for kind of 2x3 walls, and the insulation isn't as good and things like that, but it allows for a very inexpensive way to produce a housing vehicle. And one of the big differences between manufactured housing and modular housing is that manufactured housing typically is placed on a temporary foundation. That temporary foundation a lot of times is, jack stands, and in the housing, the house itself is, tied down to the ground through stakes and strapping, and then skirted. And manufactured homes can be put on a permanent foundation, but when they're not put on a permanent foundation, they actually have a title because the trailer that they're delivered on stays underneath them. And so they can be moved down the road, at some point in the future, which is why they have a title. So then we get into modular housing. Modular housing is the same as traditional construction from the standpoint of it's built to the same set of ICC codes that traditional construction is built to, whether it be IBC or IRC code homes. Modular housing is built typically with the same materials as a site-built project, but one of the key differences is that a modular house is placed on a permanent foundation in Colorado. One of the questions that came in from the participants in this call ahead of time was to talk a little bit about financing on these units. And so with manufactured housing, because it can move, financing can be a little bit of a challenge. There's chattel financing is the terminology. There's various resources for that if you need to find financing mechanisms for manufactured housing. And then modular housing, there really are no restrictions. Having been in this for a long time, you pretty much all the traditional financing mechanisms, conventional mortgages, all of those things are available for modular housing. And the reason why is it's really no different. It's built to the same exact code as the stick-built, site-built home. And so there's really no financing challenges with on the modular side of things. So kind of wanted to cover a little bit of history of our industry in Colorado. Fun fact, our first factory was in Littleton, Colorado in 1940, was when the industry showed up in our state. I showed up on the landscape here, 2005 or so. And so when I showed up, we had around 4 substantial factories in our state. And so we were kind of starting in 2005, with a set of factories, and then the downturn came. So in 2008 and 9, obviously, If you were in this business, you knew that things, kind of got a little rough from a housing standpoint. And most of our factories, not most, but all of our factories eventually went out of business. By the time we got to, sorry, let me move this there. Trying to move this bar off my screen. I can't see it. Okay. By the time 2012 and 13 came around, all of the factories that we had in our state had either pulled back to kind of their sister factories that were located in the surrounding states, or they just closed their doors because of the housing downturn that happened. By the time we got back, so we spent about a total of, no, I can't advance my slide. There we go. We spent about a total of 10 years in our state without basically any notable modular factories in our state. And so up now we're back up to basically 4 factories. Now, I want to qualify that and say there are other modular factories. If you looked at the Division of Housing registration for modular factories in the state, there's certainly more than 4 listed there. A lot of them are smaller. They make a small quantity of product, cabins and things like that. And so we really have 4 main factories, that are capable of producing, 2, 3, 4, 500 homes a year out of them as of today. So I wanted to cover what Colorado's demand and production is historically in Colorado. And so we're going to kind of look at 2 years worth of data here. So in Colorado, Colorado consumed 701 modular housing units, and Colorado factories produced about 56 of those, and the other out-of-state factories produced 645 of our demand in our state in 2021, giving us about an 8% in-state production rate as far as meeting our own demand for modular housing. 2022 didn't change much, up a little bit, 717, but we're starting to have some other factories starting to come online in 2022, and so we're actually able to get it up to about 12% in 2022. Obviously, the negative side of that is that we're getting 90 or so percent of our modular housing demand provided to us by our surrounding states versus in-state. This is an idea of what states do supply Colorado with modular housing units. Obviously, the big one's Nebraska. There's probably 4, maybe 5 modular factories in Nebraska that Colorado is by far, one of their largest customers. And some of the other ones, big ones, come in from Idaho and things like that. But really, Nebraska is the big player. This mix changes a little bit for 2022, but it pretty much looks the same every year. So what does that cost us? One thing I want to note on this slide, realize this right before our presentation, is that on the previous slides, we talked about housing units. It takes multiple boxes to make a housing unit. And so the numbers that are on this slide are boxes. And so they don't quite correspond to the housing unit total. But nonetheless, we did the calculations, and what is it? We're buying around $180 million of modular projects, of modular components from out-of-state factories on an annual basis today. What does it cost to ship? Shipping modular homes is a pretty big topic, in the industry. It drives a lot of cost associated with modular. These things aren't cheap to move around. And so we actually kind of did the math on, we know where all these factories are in the other states, and what does it take just to get it to our state line, not the center of our state, but the state line. And so we're spending around $13.5 million annually just to get these products that we're buying from other factories to our state line. That's actually increasing the cost of our modular housing by around 8%. Because historically in the past we haven't had a lot of resources in the state to buy from to be able to remove this cost from modular housing. So I want to talk about a little bit of how are we doing right in our state compared to the rest of the country as far as utilizing modular construction. And so nationally, from a bunch of different sources, kind of a blend of commercial modular and residential modular is our national market shares is around 4% of housing construction is built with a modular, components and or format. And in Colorado, last year in Colorado in 2022, Colorado built 48,000 housing units. That's from the state demographer's office. And those are housing units. We're not talking boxes anymore. We're talking, apartment units, everything like that. 48,000. So as I said earlier, we imported around 717 modular housing units in 2022, which gives us around a statewide market share of around 1.5%. And so as you can see, from a state standpoint, Colorado definitely doesn't utilize modular construction techniques as much as, the rest of the nation as far as a market share standpoint. Kind of wanted to check in with the state agencies. Obviously, we know DOLA and CHAFA, are involved in, a lot of housing production on an annual basis. Obviously affordable, but nonetheless housing production. And so we wanted to kind of see how they were doing. In 2022, the best put together number we can get our hands on is that these two agencies, financed or, in some fashion, contributed to the construction of around 4,500 affordable housing units in 2022. Of those 4,000 units, 36 of those were modular in 2022. And so from a state agency standpoint, we're about running about half of what we are, statewide with the market rate system. Not a lot of modular being financed historically with, those two state agencies. We were able to get the numbers from CHAFA and DOLA as far as the number of modular projects that they have completed. CHAFA actually had it going back all the way to the 90s, so I cut off some of those years, but you can see there CHAFA just kind of has a project come in, not too often, hasn't had really any in the last 10, 15 years until they approved one back in 2022. And as far as DOLA goes, they have a little bit more historically than CHAFA's had. They kind of clip off, doing 20, 30 a year or whatever. But the big thing I want to highlight here is that so far in 2023, they've awarded, some level of commitment financing grants to over 151 modular housing units. And Mo's going to talk a little bit about more about these later. But you can see there's, definitely some support there, from some of the state agencies, that are kind of in the works. So that's the end of my first bit. And so I guess we can take questions on anything that I was talking about there, if anybody has any before Sam takes over.
And we did just enable the chat feature, so you can chat with all of us simultaneously rather than individually. If anybody has any questions for Nate.
You guys, I can't see the chat in my screen right now, so if
as soon as I get something, Nate, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can either raise your hand or type something in the chat box.
Oh, you did such a great job, Nate. Nobody has any
no
questions.
questions. All right.
And
Sam,
Nate will be back at the end, so there, if you do think of questions for him, you can certainly.
We have a hand up, Sam. Lucinda.
I just had a quick question on what is being done. Is there anything being done to bring that manufacturing of the modular homes in state?
Correct. I'm going to touch upon some of that during my presentation. So perfect job, Lucinda, teeing that up here in a bit. Yes, there have been efforts made, and more to come, but we'll cover that when I speak after Sam. Thank you for your question.
Okay, Nate, for modular financing, I've heard from housing developers, including nonprofit authorities, that getting investors / banks to help with financing those is a problem due to lack of track record. Would you like to address that?
Yeah, for years in our business here, we've dealt with, people taking their project into some bank, that we know or don't know. And sometimes we have a lot of, we have banks that have a lot of questions, have a lot of um, requirements around, when they'll give a deposit, when they'll pay for the balance of the modular components. Sometimes we deal with banks that say, well, we'd like the components to be delivered and on site before we pay for them, all of the above. But I will say overall, like I would say 75–80% of the banks that we deal with are very familiar with it. From a developer standpoint, we've done large projects, with the $1 million loans and things like that for modular projects, and they understand how it works and can kind of talk through it. And so I would say that, I wouldn't I wouldn't say that that's a problem. I'm not saying that there's not some bank out there that couldn't make it a problem. But if that's the case, there's plenty of other options. And if you ever, run into something like that, I'm happy to give you the name of a bunch of banks that are very familiar with the modular financing process.
Thank you, Nate. There's another question. Is there any data about cost per square foot for modulars? And I think you addressed the complexity of the cost equation in your next section. Is that right?
Correct.
All right.
We'll
touch
hold
on that
one.
MJ, and closer to the end, but we do have some information on that. And then if we don't answer your question, just retype it. Part 2 of that question: for a single family detached unit, what's the time frame from delivery to certificate of occupancy?
I'm going to defer a little bit of that to the second half of the presentation. It depends. It depends on how much on-site work we've created with the design, but we'll get to that. But we have a scheduling part as well. So all
Great.
good questions. Yeah.
Any other questions for Nate? All right, well, I'll jump in. Thank you, Nate. I'm Sam Albrecht. I work in the Division of Housing. I am the Director of the Office of Regulatory Oversight. I have 2 programs I work with. One is the Mobile Home Park Oversight Program, which we're not talking about here today. The other is the Building Codes and Standards section, and that is where we take care of all factory-built structures, either built in the state or coming from out of the state. A little bit about my background: I spent 7 years in the U.S. Air Force. My first duty station was down at what was used to be called Falcon Air Force Base, is now Schriever. And then I spent 25 years in the nonprofit industry. And one of those stints was with the Home Builders Association of Metro Denver. After I decided that I've had enough of nonprofits, I jumped over to local government. I served 5 years as the county manager for Elbert County. And now, and going way back, my original degree is in aerospace engineering. I am an honest God rocket scientist. Nobody has wanted to move these things by rocket yet, but I'm still waiting for that day to come. Next slide. So I want to start out my piece of this presentation with some important facts, and I'm going to talk about those in a couple of the other slides. But as Nate mentioned, but I think it's worth repeating, is that modular units, modular housing, are built to the same set of International Code Council standards as traditional construction. So the state has one set of building codes for all modular units built in the state or out of the state that come to the state. So that makes it a lot easier for manufacturers to get efficiencies in their production standards. And when we talk about modular units, we're talking about built in a factory and then transported complete or almost complete to the final job site, or the final site where it's going to live. And so if you think about that, if for those modular units that are built in Nebraska or Kansas or Utah, and sometimes we have units coming from Missouri, and we've had units come in as far as Tennessee, we need a way to inspect those units in those non-Colorado states to make sure they're built to that building code. And we have a process to do that. And I'll talk about that also. And as Nate said, it's the important distinction on modular units are they are attached to a permanent foundation. The other important fact I want to mention to everybody on the call is that there are over 300 local jurisdictions in the state, 64 counties, and about 260 towns, cities, and towns and cities in the state that have their own set of building codes. And that gets problematic when you're working with a manufacturer that is trying to build a base unit and has to design it to a local jurisdiction. And we'll talk a little bit about that also. But it makes the complexity in the state of Colorado tougher for the manufacturers. And I think that's the important fact I wanted you to take away from that. Next slide, Nate. So as I said, we regulate the construction, inspection, sales, and installation of modular housing construction for the state of Colorado. We provide one set of building codes for the entire state. We're on the 2018 set of codes, pretty much. There's an exception there, but we we have adapted some of those building codes to be more specific for the modular industry. So we have our own set of building codes that we actually went through an extensive rulemaking with a lot of stakeholder input, and then it goes up to the state housing board, and the state housing board approves our administrative rules, which has our building codes in it. Now, the exception to that is we want safe and quality units that are designed to meet the environmental conditions of the local jurisdiction. So every unit that, once we see the set of construction drawings, has an address on it. That address, and there's some exceptions that are lot models, and we won't go into that, but we have a way to make those work too. Every home goes to an address, and then we look at the local wind loads, the local snow loads, the winter design temps, the fire suppression requirements if they have them, and wildfire risk for the structure if the local jurisdiction has them. So we make those manufacturers design for that. And as you can imagine, with 320 jurisdictions, there's a lot of variation in snow loads, wind loads, because the state is very varied, right? The other thing that I think that's important to note about our building codes and standards for the state is we have 17 counties that don't have local building departments. Therefore, to make sure those products are safe and built to code, if a modular project wants to go into an area of the state that doesn't have a building department, they still have to build to our rules. And then the other piece of that, let's go back to the second last bullet, is that we register the manufacturers, the sellers, and the installers of those modular units. So we can keep track of them. They have annual registration requirements. They have annual quality control manual and process updates that they're required to give us. And we actually have registered sellers have to have a bond, installers have to have a bond and insurance. And now, most recently, we required the manufacturers that are selling direct to the consumers to also have a bond. Okay, next slide. Okay, let's talk about those 300 local jurisdictions. So we spend a lot of time talking to the local jurisdictions and educating the local jurisdictions. We also consider our local jurisdictions very important partners, because when a home is designed, when a modular unit is designed, we're going to take a look at the construction side of it, but the factory or the manufacturer or the seller of that unit has to make sure it's properly zoned and permitted based on that local jurisdiction. Now, some sellers do it a little different, but there's two parts, and the foundation is generally under the local jurisdiction requirement for this modular to come in on. So we will go in and we'll make sure that home is built right, it's set right, but the local jurisdictions can't change the code. For example, if they it's never a problem generally to go backwards, but we have local jurisdictions that go back and they're still on a 2006 set of building codes. Some of them, like us, and they come out every 3 years. So there's 06 versions, 9, 12, 15, 18, which we're on, and then 21 is the most current. And sometimes you get a new person in a local building department that tells those manufacturers that they have to design to the 2021 building code. And that's where we get involved, and we'll have a call with the chief building official and we'll chat it through. And we've never had a local jurisdiction say, no, Sam, you're wrong. It's always, oh yeah, that's right. I'll make sure all the guys know. So that makes it easier for the manufacturers. And so that ties in with that second bullet there, where we talk about the standardization of allowing the standardization of the manufacturers who are building product in and out of the state, but everything that's coming to the state can have a pretty base design to go forward. Now, we will jump up to the 2021 building codes at some point, and then we will also as part of our rulemaking process. So everybody will get a voice in that. Okay, next slide. All right, so this is where it gets down to the nitty gritty. I think one of the true advantages of modular is that it can be built in out of the weather and out of the elements. But the process steps for these is fairly simple. A manufacturer wants to register with the program. We won't register them until we look at their quality assurance program internally, and that they have to have a third-party agency if they're out of state doing those inspections for them. We want somebody in the quality assurance program that will go out there with the tape measure and the ruler and say, yeah, the screws on the drywall are 6 inches apart. That's what it's supposed to be. You guys are clear to go to the next step. And the third-party inspectors are walking through the factory and investigating some of that. But the quality assurance program makes sure it is built, the quality is there, and there's no shortcuts being taken. And we have the right to audit these manufacturers as that process goes. After we look through their QA program, and it's reviewed by the engineer, it's reviewed by a third party. We register them, we take and cash their check, and then they can start sending us construction drawings. Those construction drawings are submitted. They have to have that address like I talked about, so that we can check the local requirements for wind, snow, fire suppression, winter design temp, and the other local conditions. And then once those drawings and those drawings actually go through a third-party agency also for initial review, and then come to us for the final stamp. And then production inspections on that unit are provided by the state or the third-party agency. If they're in the state, we're happy to do that for them. Generally, they've got an agreement with the third-party agency that does that for them. Units that are sold by a registered seller, our registered seller requirement and our rules has very specific contract language in there, which is a consumer safety item in the statute and in the rules. And then they do have the bonding requirements. And bonding is a generic term here. They can provide a bond, a letter of credit, or a certificate of deposit. We allow 3 avenues for them to meet that requirement. Units are then delivered to the home site, and that final assembly and installation is completed. And that's the tough part. Like Nate said, there's single boxes that come out as a home, fairly complete. And then there's the 2 unit pieces where they're married together. But sometimes you get 3 or 4 units that come together, and each box is married together. And then you have a little more on-site construction to get the final home ready. And then we do a installation inspection from a registered or certified installer. And then we put an insignia on there that says it's been installed correctly. And then we do a final inspection and oversight inspection, and it gets another state insignia that says it's completed and certified. So a fairly complex process, but it's all driven on quality and safety. Okay, Nate, next slide. All right, I think this is my last slide, but just to kind of talk a little bit about some new things that have come out as a result of statute, is that we just recently brought tiny homes into the factory built structure program. So now we take a look at the HUD stuff that comes in as far as the installation side, but that federally manufactured home, that HUD code home that we all remember as mobile homes, we just do the installation of that. Modular is our big piece where we're doing both the single family, the multifamily residential, and then also we do a commercial program also for commercial factory built. Think your standalone coffee shops and things like that that come in as a box. And then we just started this year with the foundation systems. We have a consumer complaint piece of the program too. The legislature decided that one of the things they wanted us to do was to approve the design and inspect all foundation systems for factory built structures in areas of the state that do not have a local building department. And that's critical to make sure these things get installed correctly. And so we're starting off on that process as of the 1st of July of 23. And then the new requirement, bonding requirements for manufacturers. Again, I've already talked briefly about that. Now, Mo, I think you were going to talk about some of this, but I've got some of it on my slide too, I think.
That's all you.
Yep. So standardization of one of the things that we see as potentials, regulatory opportunities for modular buildings in the state are standardization of regional designs. And so we're not quite sure what it looks like. We want to explore it a little bit, but if we could cut that 323 local jurisdiction and local design requirements down to 6 or 10 or 12, whatever makes common sense, it might be a lot easier for factories to deliver units, especially if we're talking about accessory dwelling units or single family homes. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. So we have to factor in that, again, that snow load, wind load, but I think the manufacturers are willing to go to a higher one that would cover a regional aspect of that. And would allow a simpler production and simpler design review, construction drawing review. And so we're taking a look at that in depth. Another one is the acceptance of those third-party plan reviews. Like I said, every manufacturer submits to a third party. They have a quality control program, just like the factories do. They have certified and trained plan reviewers. Our statute requires us to look at it again. And from looking around at other states, that's not the norm. So we're taking a look at that and just go straight from third party to beginning of the design construction phase of the project. Local installation of local inspection of the installation for those closed panels construction. Closed panel is a new one that's really starting to poke its head into our arena. That's where the factories built closed panels with wires and everything between them, but the panels stacked flat on a flatbed truck, get delivered to the job site, and are assembled on the job site. I have 3 inspectors for the entire state. I'm going to have to depend on the locals, and we're going to do this through cooperation and education to actually look at the installation of those closed panel constructions when they get to the site. And we think we can do that and also make it an easier process. Otherwise, we're going to have an inspector on site for an entire day as those panels get installed. The other thing that we're looking at is clarifying the responsibility of manufacturers versus the sellers versus the installers versus the general contractors. In the way it works is that manufacturer builds a unit, the seller sells the unit, but then the owner wants a 2-car garage, right? And so the seller may also sell him the 2-car garage. The installer may be an independent installer. He may be contracted by the seller. And general contractors have a role in this. And when Nate talks about the complexity of building those units that come out of the box completed or out of the factory completed versus coming out of the factory, going to the job site, and then doing final assembly and final installation of some part of that construction on site, the picture gets a little messy on who's doing what. So we think it's fairly simple to do a checklist when a home is sold, that who's the manufacturer, who's taking care of who's contracting with the installer, who the installer is, and who's doing all the other on-site construction piece of that. Because some of those factories and manufacturers do not send a construction team with it, so you can't point it always back to the manufacturer. Sometimes it's a local general contractor. All right, I talk pretty fast when I get going, but I really do enjoy this, and I'll take any questions now in my piece before we jump to Mo. Okay, so there's a question: does the state modular building code require sprinklers, or only if the local jurisdiction requires it? Only if the local jurisdiction require it. We actually exempt that from we state in our International Residential Code and our International Building Code under the fire suppression requirement, if required by the local jurisdiction. So we leave that up to them.
That's one of those items, just to add to that, Sam, that is part of that standardization concept that, we hope to maybe pursue in the future. Is it's not so much that manufacturers have a problem with putting in sprinklers. They're all used to dealing with it if the local jurisdiction needs it done. But what we would like to do from a manufacturer standpoint is standardize on the sprinkler code that we're adopting into modular product. Whereas right now it's just whatever the local says. If the local has made amendments to their own sprinkler code, we also have to abide by all of those. And then the other aspect of that fire aspect is the wildfire items, and that's something where currently all the manufacturers have to abide by whatever local wildfire, fire resistant materials and things like that have to go on a house. And the problem is we have 300 versions of that across the state. It'd be nice if we could, standardize into some like bands, where, a jurisdiction can pick which one they'd like the factory, but at least kind of provide some level of standardization, for going forward.
Right. Good point, Nate. There's another question about, are there often conflicts between local and state codes? No, not really, because on the modular side, the local jurisdictions accept our codes. And so even if we use them for inspections of our product, and we have a program for that, they inspect to the 2018 building code, the IRC, the International Residential Code, as we've amended it. So the local jurisdictions in most cases understand that we have authority with, and it doesn't matter if it's a county, city, town, or home rule, it doesn't matter. They have to accept the state building codes. And then are there third-party inspectors for sprinkler systems off-site? Fire Prevention and Control has rolled out some new requirements for inspections of sprinkler systems. We're working closely with them to better understand it so we can relay that information to manufacturers. Generally, they have the local fire departments in the bigger metropolitan areas will send somebody through Department of Fire Prevention Control training to become certified. Anybody can, and some of our manufacturers and some of our third-party agencies are starting to send people to Colorado to go through that fire suppression training. And then there was a question about local fire departments don't like that units were delivered with drywall over sprinkler systems. Yeah, absolutely. There's that doesn't make any sense at all if you've still got to test it on site. There is some testing that can be done in the factory. And there's a couple different types of fire sprinkler systems, and it's up to that local jurisdiction to tell us what fire suppression system they want in the units. Right. So if they didn't do it right, then the factory would have to make it right. They'd have to open up those walls if that was a requirement. If they put the wrong sprinkler system in there or covered up something that they didn't.
Yeah, so the typical procedure, you know, when we deal with these is, you know, there's most of the modular factories don't do their own fire sprinkler install. They're not certified to do it. There's lots of licensing associated with that. There's a number of Colorado-based fire sprinkler companies that work with the factories that send product here, and they literally travel out to those locations, do a rough-in at the factory, get it inspected, you know, with a certified, you know, coordinate with the fire department. And then when it shows up in state, then that same installer that traveled to the factory will come out and, you know, complete the system, you know, under the watch of the fire department. And so there's a system in place. It's a little clunky, which is what we're trying to figure out how to make it a little bit more standardized, but there's certainly a way that we do install, you know, the fire sprinkler systems all the time at the factory.
Great, thanks, Nate. So, and then Ms. Brown asked the question for numbers of tiny homes being placed in Colorado. So our tiny home rules and statute just went into effect on the 1st of July. So we have not had any go through the program yet. Everything that's currently being built as tiny homes and sold as tiny homes are being built to the RV standards, RVIA, the Recreational Vehicle Industry Association standards, or the ANSI standard 119.5, I think it is. But we have not yet had a tiny home go through the program, but we just started in July, and we're ready for them. So if you, we are talking to several of the manufacturers in Colorado that are wanting to produce tiny homes, and we hope to see those units start coming down the production line pretty soon.
Yeah, and just to clarify, when we say tiny home, it's a statutory definition now, and specifically a dwelling, right? It's designed to be a dwelling, constructed to be a dwelling that's inspected and certified through the state program. It really distinguishes it from other models that may have already existed prior to July 1st and may still be coming into the state post July 1st that look like a dwelling, but are in fact not. They're built, as Sam said, to recreational vehicle standards. And people need to know that means that those are designed and constructed for seasonal temporary use only, recreational use only. Even though people may be using them full time, that's not what they're designed for. This particular product that the state is calling a tiny home is separate from that. It's being constructed to codes as adopted by the State Housing Board, similar to modular, but of course, unique to that particular model type. And of course, ultimately is designed and constructed to be a dwelling. So just something to keep in mind. And it is new, and you know, people are still wrapping their heads around it, I guess. But we're hoping to see more traction, because ultimately we would like to see folks living full time in dwellings versus something that's designed to be a recreational vehicle.
Mo's exactly right. And those tiny homes that will come through the state program will get a state insignia. It'll have an address. It'll be designed for the wind and snow load and the local design requirements in that jurisdiction. And it will be built to the same 2018 International Residential Code standard, the IRC standard, that modulars are being built to in the state. So they'll be, and they're designed for long-term occupancy.
Yeah, the Division of Housing does not have jurisdiction currently over kind of what the historical tiny home volume that has been produced in Colorado, which is that RV code standard. that segment of the industry, so to speak, is just continuing on. They'll still produce product. This is kind of like upgraded version of tiny homes that can allow them for permanent dwelling.
And I know we don't want to digress too far in tiny homes, but on the website, there is on the Building Codes and Standards website, there's an FAQ for consumers of tiny homes, an FAQ for local jurisdictions of tiny homes, and an FAQ for manufacturers who want to build tiny homes in the state of Colorado, because we can see a future where somebody in Arizona is building a tiny homes to come up here to Colorado. So it's the same program and process for manufacturers of modular manufacturers of tiny homes. And they're built to the same standard. Again, safety and quality, right? That's what we're looking for. So if you have any questions on those FAQs, if you want to take a look at that, please feel free to contact me after this webinar. Be happy to talk through, especially if you're a local jurisdiction. We're seeing quite a, we deal with questions almost every day on tiny homes coming into my jurisdiction. And this comes into the difference too when we talk about the difference between zoning and permitting and construction standards. So zoning and permitting is local jurisdiction, and they may not allow dwellings under 400 square feet. In some residential areas of their zoning plan. And so they may not be able to allow that permit. So I know there was a couple jurisdictions. I talked to a county 2 weeks ago that says they want to make sure it's very clear that the tiny homes coming in are state certified tiny homes with the state insignia, and that they're designed for long-term occupancy, and then they're going to change their zoning to allow them as permanent residences in the county. And Nate, I think that's any.
You got another question about you touched upon this earlier about the insignia, but you might want to detail it a little bit more.
Dwelling tiny homes versus sheds that look like tiny homes. Yeah, I know. If you go to Google, you can actually order tiny home sheds from Walmart and Home Depot and Lowe's. But what you're going to be looking for is the state insignia with the building codes on it, and the local jurisdiction requirements on it, and it's gone through the state program. If it has an RVIA sticker on it, then it's a recreational vehicle, just like a fifth-wheeled travel trailer, right? That is designed for short-term occupancy, and it's not built to the construction standards. And then stuff that grows up in somebody's shed that doesn't have an insignia on it is what it is, right? It'll be classified probably as an RV. We have a process for homeowners who want to build their own tiny homes to get the state insignia, so we're willing to work with them on that. Sorry, Nate. When we said tiny homes, it just popped up.
Yeah, and just to clarify something too, it's a point in time, right? Just like when a mobile home became a manufactured HUD code home that Nate touched upon earlier, that cutoff was June 15, 1976. So prior to June 15, 1976, they were mobile homes, and they were built to whatever standard was in the head of the builder, right? And whether it was accepted by a local jurisdiction or not, depending on that local jurisdiction. On June 15, 1976, that's when the federal government effectively stepped in and said, from this point forward, they're going to be built to these standards that we've established, right? Tiny homes is similar. Prior to July 1st of 2023, it is completely up to the local building department to determine if that was built to be a dwelling or not, if it was built to be safe, if it was code compliant to whatever requirements that local jurisdiction is requiring. On July 1st, 2023 and on, it's going to be Division of Housing that's going to be certifying a tiny home that's actually a dwelling. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So we're not going to be going back in time. If you're dealing with a home that was built in 2021 and they're saying it's a tiny home, it will never have a Division of Housing sticker on it, insignia on it, right? Because our program started on July 1st, 2023. Just keep that in mind. Great questions. Any other questions for Sam before I jump in? All right, I will jump in then. Lucinda, thank you. So I'm Mo Miskell. I'm the Deputy Division Director, the Division of Housing. I have not been in this role for very long. I've been in this role since May of last year. Prior to that, I was actually in Sam's role. So I had the good fortune of appointing Sam to replace myself, and he's done a fantastic job. And even then, I didn't have that role for very long. I've been with the Division of Housing for 6 years now. It was actually 6 years a couple of weeks ago. And what attracted me to Division Housing was the first job that I had Division Housing, which is the program manager of the Building Codes and Standards section. And that's the program that oversees the modular construction in the state. Why? It's because even though modular has been around since for decades, as Nate pointed out, it just never quite got the traction, which I think it should, right? I viewed it as the future, right? And how can I get involved? Not on the ground floor. I wasn't here in the 1940s, obviously, but how can I get involved in a way to really get it to where it needs to be, right? And so that's what attracted me to the position of Division of Housing, and it's led me to other areas within the division and to my current role. But ultimately, modular construction is what brought me here. And as you can see at the last bullet here, well, housing and of course regulation. I've always been involved in regulation my whole career for over 22 years now in a variety of settings, housing being the most recent. Of course, my current duties take me away from regulatory aspects of the division, but I do work closely with Sam and Nate continuously. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to start touching upon what Lucinda asked about in the next slide. So before we get to that, the Division of Housing has been very involved in modular construction projects, right, in the form of gap financing. And just to clarify a slide that Nate shared earlier, we are a state agency, Department of Local Affairs, Division of Housing. CHAFA actually is not a state agency, so we probably need to amend the title of that slide.
Yeah.
They are involved in affordable housing, and they're an important partner, and but they're not a state agency. So just keep that in mind. They obviously also don't want that confusion to be out there. So we're just setting the record straight. CHAFA, not a state agency. Division of Housing most certainly is. And so for the last 4 years, these are some numbers we put together where the Division of Housing has gotten involved in financing modular specific projects. And as you can see, we've done 12 over the last 4 years. And they showed you the developers that existed, disappeared, not developers, the manufacturers that existed, disappeared, and the manufacturers that now exist. And of course, what now exists is completely different than what used to exist. But two of the bigger players are Fading West and Indy Dwell. Fading West out of Buena Vista and Indy Dwell out of Pueblo. And all of these projects were through those two manufacturers. And of course, working with different developers on those projects. So we're looking at roughly 25 million. It was a little over 25 million awarded for these projects. So they're in various stages. Some are completed, some haven't started yet, but these are all awards made through our state housing board. And as you can see, there's a mix between for sale, so home ownership opportunities, and rental. And using a variety of different funding streams. The Housing Development Grant has been around for some time and has different smaller streams that feed into it. The Homeless Solution Program is newer. I think it was established in about 2017 or so using marijuana tax credit money. And it is utilized for vouchers, but it also can be utilized for development, specifically for permanent supportive housing development. And then last but not least, the newer funding stream, this last one though is temporary, or I should say limited, in that it's basically from federal stimulus dollars. And so this has to be expended within a couple of years. And it was $138 million that we received for that particular fund, through that particular funding stream through the federal dollars. And the demand for these dollars outpaces that money. So it will be spent in short order, which is great, but we are also looking for other funding opportunities because we are in an affordable housing crisis still. And I'm going to touch upon one of those that has come thanks to the voters of Colorado in the next slide. But as you can see at the end of this slide, That's resulted in 221 units, or will, roughly, when it's all said and done. And as you can see, I think we touched upon this earlier, or there was a question about the cost per square foot. I think Nate's going to go into more detail about that later. But just from the projects that we've seen, this is a breakdown of the total development cost per square foot from 2020 to present. As you can see, it's gotten a little pricier, but everything's got more expensive in the construction world in recent history. Next slide, please, Nate. Now, for those of you who are in Colorado in November of last year, you saw this on your ballot. I'm not going to ask if you voted for it or not, but a majority of you did, and it went into effect, and that's Proposition 123, right? Where now the state has established a dedicated revenue stream to supply affordable housing projects in the state. And we've gotten the actuals for this year. And when you see year one, the funding for year one is actually half the year of funding for a full year of programs, okay? So for year two, when we get the full funding, the estimates are roughly double what you're going to be seeing for year one. Because year one, those actuals were revenue collected between January 1st and June 30th of this year, which is the second half of our last fiscal year. And of course, that money then has to sustain us for a full fiscal year, which just started July 1st of this year and will run through June 30th of next year. So hopefully that makes sense. And it established 2 state agencies to administer these dollars. I'm going to really spend most of my time talking about Division of Housing and the money we received through the Department of Local Affairs. But keep in mind that, and my next slide touches upon this, or 2 slides from now, that the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, which is another state agency, got 60% of those funds, right? Received it for year one, 60%, and ongoing, it'll be 60%, whereas we're getting 40%. And they, Office of Economic Development and International Trade, also known as OEDIT, are partnered with CHAFA, which Nate mentioned earlier, to administer those dollars. So the state agencies, OEDIT, they're partnering with CHAFA on their 3 programs and those dollars. Now, our programs, and where it touches upon modular, even though not specifically designed for modular per se, but really for development, and modular being a piece of it, just as we talked about in the last slide, are 2 programs that we're going to be administering utilizing Proposition 123 funds. One is a home ownership program. In year one, we received $32 million for that. And then the second one is a homelessness program, where we received $28.8 million in year one. So the vast majority, and if you go back 1 slide, please, Nate. So the vast majority of these projects were utilizing HDG and 1304 funds, right? So we can utilize the homeownership dollars from Proposition 123 as a revenue stream for projects just like that, right? Whereas the HSP dollars were specific to permanent supportive housing development, right? So we can use the homelessness program. If you go back to the next slide, Nate, the homelessness program dollars, we can use it for projects like that. So just keep that in mind. And these are monies that go towards eligible entities. The key, though, for the homeownership program is in order to unlock those funds for use in jurisdictions, those local governments have to commit to increase their affordable housing by 3% each year. And so first they have to establish what that baseline affordable housing is and commit to increase it by 3% each year. And starting by November 1st of this year, or by the deadline November 1st of this year, that's a 3-year commitment. So what we're talking about is 9% over 3 years, or they can opt in next year for a 2-year commitment. And they're really then saying at that point that they're going to increase their affordable housing baseline by 6% over 2 years, or they can sit out 1 more year and do a 1-year commitment at 3%. But if you don't commit, these funds cannot be deployed for use in your jurisdiction. If you do commit, they can be. The catch being the homelessness program. On the development side, the same thing stands, right? If the money is going to be following people specifically, right? Vouchers, for instance, to house somebody specifically, that doesn't require local government commitment. So just keep that in mind. On the development side, none of the Prop 123 funds are available, whether it's through us, through these two programs, or OEDIT CHAFA through their three programs, unless a local government has committed to increase its affordable housing by 3% each year. Next slide, please. So this is where I talk about the programs and dollars that are actually specific to modular. So this, Lucinda, answers your question. So we as a state did identify that we need to do something. We need to help somehow, right? Obviously, the marketplace does a great job, but how do we help turbocharge it in a way, right? And the bill was run in 2022. I think it was House Bill 22-1282 to create the Innovative Housing Incentive Program, or to at least fund it. Sorry, what's that, Nate?
21.
Oh, it's 2021. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, got the wrong year. But
Okay.
1282 is a number, right?
Yes.
I think
Yeah, you got the number right.
Got the
Yeah.
number right, wrong year. So thank you. So that's $40 million for Innovative Housing Incentive Program. And that's not specific to modular, but the vast majority of folks that would be eligible would be modular. But if you're innovative in creating housing, utilizing technology and not doing it traditionally, you could be eligible for these funds. 3D printing is an example of something that could happen on site that would fit. Panel construction, Sam touched upon that earlier. Closed would be modular. Open construction would actually not be modular. But all of those would be eligible. But we've had several applicants apply for at least Part A, because that's live, has been live for several months now, and several awards have been made as a result. And as you can see, that's broken up into two parts. Section A here, what's currently live. There's a working capital, money for working capital, and then a per unit incentive grant, right? And we've seen both awarded so far. And the cash awards, the per unit incentive grant, vary, right? Different numbers for different things. You know, if you are building a home that's going to be installed in Colorado, you get a certain amount, right? If you're meeting certain energy requirements, energy efficiencies that you're seeing in your product, you get a certain amount for that per unit, right? And so on and so forth. So there's a whole list of this on the OEDIT website, and we get to the presentation later on in the slide deck, you'll see a slide that has resources that will direct you to the contact for this particular program. Now, on the factory loan side, this is a newer piece, and OEDIT has partnered with CHAFA on this particular piece, and that's opening up on September 5th. So we're all excited to see that from a modular perspective, and that application window does close on November 3rd. So for those of you who are on the manufacturing side already, or know people who are, you definitely want to promote this for them. I'm sure they already know about this, but just in case, because it is hot off the presses and a huge opportunity here to provide 10 million, up to potentially 10 million in funding to either, result in the construction of a new plant in the state, or really enhance existing facilities and operations in the state. So something to keep in mind as well. And I think I saw a chat. Oh, very good. Cool. Thank you, Lucinda. All right, next slide, please. Now, I guess, oh yeah. So this is I touched upon earlier, the when I mentioned 3 programs that OEDIT and CHAFA were administering that were from Proposition 123, one of those 3 programs is our concessionary debt program. And that one, a piece of it is specific to modular and factory built financing. So that's why I wanted to highlight that on the slide. So they have got a variety, they've got 3 major programs and a variety of different sub-programs, but this particular one is specific to modular construction in our state. And for year 1, they're dedicating a good chunk of the money that they're receiving for year 1 to modular and factory built financing, and that's to the tune of $18 million in year one. That will change after year one, but that's what they've announced as being dedicated for this particular piece to start off. So as you can see, that's still under development. Some more details to come out in the next couple of months about what they'll actually look like. But for now, this is a rough idea of what's going to be available for modular construction in our state. And I believe that's it for me. Next slide. Yep. Any questions for me, folks? All right. Seeing none. Oh. Yeah. So if you are constructing affordable housing, this is where it gets interesting. So it really is, housing that's built to be affordable as defined in the law. So it depends. Of course, if it's something that's going to be, for example, funded by us through Proposition 123 that meets those thresholds, that'll automatically count, regardless of what type of home it is, whether it's multifamily structure or single family. But it really is dependent on that affordable housing definition, which may not be the same definition as to what the federal government has out there or what a local jurisdiction may view to be affordable. So it's really tied to that first and foremost. And that is 60% AMI on the rental side, and then 100% AMI on the for sale side. So it's really tied into that definition, not specific to structure type, if that makes sense. And I think this next one is for actually you.
So the second part of Kathy's question is there a model or example ordinance for local jurisdictions to adopt to allow for the certified tiny homes? Not that I know of at this point in time. It's something that there may be interest for in the future, but right now it's jurisdiction by jurisdiction. But it's fairly simple. I mean, all the local jurisdiction has to do is to allow a tiny home, a state certified tiny home, to be utilized as a ADU and it has to be mounted on a temporary or permanent foundation. And that allows that. And the modulars, that is just to allow the ADUs. Elbert County just started allowing ADUs about 4 years ago. And then we saw a lot of those starting to come in as modular units. And then Sheila has a question. Are there limits as to where the homes can be built that are funded by these programs? Mo, I think that's you.
Yeah, it is Nate. But before I get to that, Nate was going to say something or add to what you were just answering.
What I was going to say is anybody that's, kind of contemplating if they need, kind of an example. Sam, I'm guessing you can be a resource as far as pointing them to other jurisdictions that have already gone through the exercise of adopting state certified tiny homes to help people.
I can. Eric Freed would be a great resource. They've changed their codes to allow for tiny homes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the gentleman that Sam just mentioned is the building official of Larimer County, and they're the ones that were the proponents behind the bill to regulate tiny homes in our state. So important partners, thought partners there.
Yeah.
So Sheila's question is definitely for me. Are there any limits as to where these homes can be built that are funded by these programs, i.e. are there parts of the state that may get more funding than others? That depends on the revenue stream, right? Some of this money is very specific and targeted. There was a bill from last year, House Bill 22-1304, I believe, that wants to distinguish between, how much should go to rural versus how much should go to urban, right? So you may get something specificity like that, right? You got the different AMIs. That's not targeting a specific location, but targeting specific levels. So they all vary. So it just depends. And so you want to be careful if you're an applicant, right? And you're applying for these funds, that application process will let you know what you needed, how you're eligible for those funds and where those funds would be deployed or can be deployed, right? So it just depends. You want to visit the CHAFA's website and OEDIT's website to see what those programs specifically do and what they target. OEDIT, right? And us as well. An example is OEDIT, the Innovative Housing Fund that I mentioned. The program that they currently have in effect, I think you can get more dollars if the unit is being deployed in a part of the state that needs more of an economic boost. I forget how they word it, versus other parts of the state. So there are requirements and variables like that exist, but they're very specific to the funding stream and that particular program and its guidelines, if that makes sense.
And also the opting in, Mo, is that as well?
Well, yeah, of course, with Proposition
at a high
123,
level, just opting in. Yeah,
correct.
right.
Exactly.
Right.
At a high level, absolutely. If your jurisdiction hasn't opted in, then those funds, for the most part, are not available for use, period, in that jurisdiction. So you're right, a great example of how that could be, location specific. Great question, Sheila. Thank you for that. Any others before I turn it over to Nate to see us home? All right, thank you guys.
All right, so kind of getting back into the manufacturing side of this, and one of the things that is a challenge when you're thinking about modular housing is getting your head wrapped around kind of the manufacturing environment of building versus the typical traditional site built version. And so we're talking about manufacturing housing here, but we're talking about manufacturing it. And, one of the things I always kind of like to draw a correlation to is the automotive industry, right? So when you have, an automotive production line and you got your F-150 going down that production line, there are certain things you can change on that F-150, and there are a lot of things you can't change on that F-150. You can, pick out your seat color and maybe order the four-wheel drive model, but if you want to make that engine different, they're going to say no. If you want to make that bed 6 inches longer, unless it's an option, the answer is no. And so, manufacturing has its own limitations associated with it. And so I kind of wanted to cover, what it looks like these days when we manufacture housing, and how those limitations, kind of apply. So we're just going to kind of go through some aspects of this. And the first one is in manufacturing, all of the factories have kind of preset building assemblies. They have ways that they like to build housing, and those ways vary dramatically sometimes between factory to factory. They have a certain way that they like to build their wall assemblies. They all, have found, seemingly different ways to meet the code requirements, from energy and envelope things. Sometimes they use foam, sometimes they use zip bar. This is a detail where, in a manufacturing modular environment, the ceiling is built separately from the floor, whereas most, traditional stick-built construction, the floor and the ceiling are the same structural component. And so, there's a lot of different preset building assemblies that are associated with modular construction versus, stick-built construction where you can just do kind of, whatever you want. Next area I want to talk about is box width and length, and so this is a typical floor plan for, of just a modular house. And, that's a box, right? This is a 2-box house, and that box has some limitations associated with it. Maximum length that we can drive down the highway is about 76 feet in the modular world. And most of the factories produce boxes in width anywhere from about a minimum of 12 up to a maximum of 18. And so, if you're designing, a affordable housing project and you want to use modular components and you really want an 87-foot long building, you're going to have to think about that. There are ways to accomplish that. We can always do it, but we're going to end up building it in 2 boxes instead of 1. But if you build it a 76-foot building, it becomes a lot more economical than adding on that 13 feet, foot box. And so there's, certainly limitations on box widths and lengths associated with manufacturing housing versus just building it in the construction world, where you can do pretty much any size that you'd like. Roof designs. So, in the modular world, roofs are a challenge. And so, different manufacturers approach roofs in different ways. They all have, some manufacturers have kind of like a catalog of roof trusses that they, kind of use on top of their units. That's going to limit, your roof pitches at times. Some have hinged roofs. That's what the picture on the right is here, is a hinged roof where it ships laying down, and we stand it up when we install it, out on the site. On the picture on the left is a detail where this factory doesn't do hinge roofs, but they do a little cap truss, on top of their roof. And so the reason why they're doing all of this is when we ship these things, we're basically trying to stay under 16 feet. 16 feet gets you pretty much under all the state highways and federal highway bridges. And so, a lot of the roof design options that you have when you build traditional construction start to be a little bit more limited when you're manufacturing housing. And it really just comes down to that standardization, right? Factories need to know that they can build, a number of different roof configurations, on all of their products, instead of just having it, be, all sorts of variations. Interior finishes. So just like that Ford F-150 on the line, where you can pick out your King Ranch seats or your brown or your white leather, same goes with a lot of the manufacturers. They usually offer, a lot of them offer a limited number of cabinetry and trim options. As long as you like white or gray, you're good to go on your cabinetry and your trim. And the reason why is they buy these products in bulk. They're not just buying your cabinetry, they're buying flat packs of, truckloads of cabinetry in certain sizes that they'll design every single kitchen with. And so, there's certainly a lot more, standardization to help with cost associated with manufacturing. So this is, if we just kind of take a look at this across 3 different factories, right? So we have building assemblies that are different. Some use foam, some use zip bar on that first line item there. Some have 2x6 walls, some have 2x4 walls. You can still meet energy code with 2x4 walls. It's just a little bit more challenging, but you can do it. Box widths matter a lot at factories. Some factories, can't quite get to 18 feet, probably because they have an 18-foot door at the end of their factory. Others, just standardize on that 14 to 16 foot range, and others can go all the way up to 18 feet, in range. Some factories can only produce a maximum box length of 66 feet, just because that's the space that they have running down the line in their factory, and they can't produce kind of the maximum allowed length of 76 feet. Others, when we get to roof systems, some do no hinge roofs. They don't like them at all. They won't put them on their houses, but they'll do the cap truss that we were looking at, a minute ago. Everybody's always willing to omit them and just build you a flat where you can put your trusses on site. One factory, that's what they do. They just basically omit, the roofs, and they always do on-site trusses. One factory has 27 cabinetry choices. They're kind of the custom one. We buy a lot from this factory because people like picking out all their cabinetry. But a lot of others, have pretty limited cabinetry and trim choices, for the thing. And so, these 3 factories right here are, 2 that send a lot of product in from Nebraska is Heritage Homes and Champion, and then Fading West, has their, factory standards as well. There's definitely not a standard in the modular industry. Each factory kind of has their own operating systems that they work with for finishes, as well as the way they put their structures together. One of the ways that I kind of like to describe this is, if you guys are looking at an affordable housing project and you got your 2 acres out back and you want to sit down and, and really look at, what your options are. You kind of call together your engineering and architect team, and you're sitting down, and really you got a blank canvas. You can do whatever you want. You can look at any type of building envelope. You can look at any type of, energy system, energy ratings. You got a blank canvas, but if you're sitting down, to design a modular affordable housing project, the analogy I like to look like is it's paint by number. There's certain ways, there's certain things you should do. There's certain things you have to do when you're designing a modular project that don't really come into play if you have, the blank canvas of traditional construction. And so, at this point, I think I probably, have you a little bit, saying, well, wow, these things, must look crazy bad because of all of these restrictions. And that's not necessarily the case. You can design some really nice looking modular product using all of those design limitations. These are all products that our company's built over the years. We've built, this is a great product here. If you look at that roof, it's a nice shed roof. You can build that whole thing at the factory. The little cute ones that we've done. This is a modular duplex that was a Champion, I believe, that we bought the components from. To give you an idea on schedule, somebody asked earlier, I think we built this project in 4.5 months from breaking ground to CO. And so it can be done very quickly if everything aligns right, on the schedule. Some housing we built in Carbondale, I think that was. This is up in Fraser. This had a lot of a little bit of stick-built roof on it. That roof pitch is pretty hard to do at the factory, and so they omitted it, and it was built out on site. This is a townhome project that we put together up in Granby. On the backside, all of those decks and things like that were built on site, but you can see the modular behind it. This is the front of the building. And so, as you look at these, you can, knowing they're modular, you can kind of look and see the boxes, right? And the key is, what are you adding to them, to kind of dress them up, and, how are you doing that, in a cost-effective manner? And so there's certainly a lot of rules that if you follow, you can build modular housing very economically. But there's also, if you don't follow those rules, modular housing can get out of control price-wise pretty quick. And so let's talk about the benefits of modular housing. There's a great study out there in the resource page at the end of this presentation. There'll be a link to this study if you'd like to get into it a little bit more. But McKinsey & Company's big consulting firm did a kind of a big study nationwide on modular projects and, what type of benefits they provide. The number one benefit from modular housing, and Sam kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, is the fact that, one, it's built indoors, so you can build it at any time of the year. But two is that the site work can happen in parallel with those units being built indoors. And so when you're in Colorado, like we all are, and we all have these short building envelopes, especially up in the mountains, this product fits very well for that. I will tell you, most of our business heads up into the mountains because modular works very well up there. You can start your site work and be weathered in by the time summer's over if you time it right, and you get the production schedule you want out of the factory. And so typically, what they found is that if that can be accomplished, you're going to save 20 to 50% on your construction schedule if it all works out from a modular schedule standpoint. The next one is cost, and this is obviously a big topic. Everybody kind of wants to know about this. What does this stuff cost? Obviously, Mo earlier, kind of gave you guys some numbers on what the Division of Housing, has been seeing with the 151 units that they've given awards to so far in 2023. I'll talk a little bit more about that data in a second, but as far as this study goes, there's a lot of different areas, that drive cost in a construction project, and this study kind of broke them down. And, the biggest savings associated with modular construction is on site labor. And think about that, as you're building, in Colorado with the labor rates that we're paying these days, from a carpenter and framing crews and all those things, especially up in the mountain areas. And so what it really comes down to in the end is what they say is basically that your cost savings is anywhere from 20% to 10% over. So it's a 30% band. And I would tell you, from being in this industry for many years, the ones that are over 10% modular cost more, they didn't follow all the rules. If you follow the rules that we were kind of talking about earlier, where you're working with the factory, to really come up with a cost-effective design that's really completed heavily at the factory and not on site, that's when you can really achieve a lot of the cost savings associated with modular. On the note of those, the numbers that Division Housing came out with, or we put together for this slide on what modular housing cost. Our goal is to kind of work on those a little bit more between now and the conference to have a little bit more of a analysis there. But right now, the only comparison we can make is they were running at around $450 total development cost per square foot for modular projects. Across to Chaffa, another agency, Chaffa tracks what their total development cost is running in a given year, and they're running about $470 per square foot. And so there's about a 10% difference between those two numbers, but we'd like those numbers to be inside the same agency, not agency, organization, so that we can add a layer of accuracy to those. And so we're going to be working on kind of a little bit of that comparison. So I kind of want to digress a little bit. Those rules that we're talking about, I kind of wanted to provide you guys a slide of kind of like what are my rules when I'm designing a modular project to make sure that it is done as cost effectively as possible. And that is, number one, is to maximize the factory box size. So if a factory can build you a 76-foot long by 18-foot wide box, and you can design your project to include boxes of that size, you will definitely get the most economical price per square foot out of that factory. If you run a 45-foot box size 16 down the line, that's literally 50% of that square footage, you're going to pay a premium for basically the overhead allocation of the factory applying to a smaller square footage, even though you're taking up the same spot on the production line. You really need to limit traditional construction activities on the project as much as you can. And by that, I mean, building out walkout basements, with traditional construction methods, adding to rooms, decks and all those things. I realize you need a certain amount of them, to make the project look right. But certainly limiting those is what really allows you to kind of have more of an economical experience with modular housing. Crawl spaces are your friend. Try to stay away from basements unless you're just going to make them a big utility room. They're inexpensive, and they work really well with modular because we have to get under there to hook up all the plumbing anyway. Try not to omit the finishes at the in exchange for on-site completion at the factory. One thing that's happened over the years is factories have started to compete more in the traditional, housing world, is that they don't want to disappoint. And so they've all been trained to say when, somebody says, well, I really want this type of roof, or I really want, these cabinets or these interior doors. They don't want to say no. So what they say is that, you know what, you can just do that on site. We'll just omit them. And at that moment, you feel good. Oh, I can still have what I want, whatever design, criteria it was. And the problem is that if you hear that, your price just went up. Your total project price, their price might have went down a little bit. So you think you got some money back, but by the time you're done out in the field, you really don't want it. You want the factory to do every ounce of work that they are capable of doing, and you want to design your product to maximize the amount of work that the factory can complete. Last item is lower pitch roofs are your friends. If you can get by with low pitch roofs that don't have hinges and cap trusses on them, the factory will complete all of your roofing at the factory. Just one less thing you have to do out on site to drive your cost up. So where to start? So if you're considering, looking into a modular, housing project, where do you start? Because like I was saying, it's a little bit different. It's painting by numbers. It's not necessarily, the blank canvas process that everyone is used to. And so when you work with modular factories, every modular factory that I know of has an in-house design and drafting engineering department, or some of them work with preferred design partners. And so I kind of wanted to give you some examples of this, with a couple of factories. So it's not just me telling you this, but so Gurdon, they're a really big outfit out of Idaho. They employ in-house staff for engineering, structural, electrical, plumbing, mechanical systems, as well as full design development and plan approval submittals. And so, Gurdon really does a lot of the design work associated with all of their product. Fading West on their website. Fading West does a little different. They have a strategic partnership with EV Studios in Denver. Dean over at EV Studios has been in kind of built his firm around supporting modular, design, for the last couple of decades, and works, specifically with some of the factories like Fading West. But one, and even Fading West takes it even a step further and says, outside of modular architecture, we are happy to work with whoever designer you would like to work with. And if you think about why the factories do this, it's because of all those things we talked about. They have the way that they are capable of building. They have their own, structural assemblies that they're used to doing, the way that they do ceilings and roof, assemblies, different trusses that they allow or don't allow. And what all of these factories do is what they don't want to do is have somebody else draw the project and have to educate them on what their factory can and cannot do as the project is being designed. Now, a lot of these factories will work with, if you're used to having, kind of an architect involved, with your team, they will work with those architects. That architect will be involved in, just general floor planning, certainly a lot of, figuring out how the elevations, what you're going to add, all those decks and things that make a modular project look well. But that architect won't be drawing the structural drawings for the factory. They won't be drawing the shop drawings for the factory, just because the factories kind of hold that near and dear to make sure that they kind of have a, again, standardized process to build their product. The other one is Rise Modular. They say connecting with a modular manufacturer as early as possible is probably the best way for evaluating whether you have a good modular project or not. And so, that's where to start. I would say a lot of these conversations start either directly with the factories or with some of the, designated design partners that these factories work with. And they have sales staffs. They can help you, to understand what's possible, what's not possible. They can very quickly give you estimates. They can probably even provide some buildings that they've built already and say, hey, this is what this one's currently pricing out at, just to kind of give you an idea of what you might be dealing with, pricing wise. And so on that note, I kind of wanted to talk through a little bit of the typical factories that have been serving Colorado, that were on that pie chart a lot earlier. And so each factory, because they kind of have their own, capabilities, they kind of have a product type that they're better at than other factories. And so I kind of wanted to group it by then. And so there's three factories, Gurdon, Nashua, and Rise, that are the big multifamily factories. Like if you're going to build an 80-unit apartment building on a podium, in Metro Denver, these are your guys. They're used to that. You cannot call these guys and order a single family home. They won't talk to you. And so these are the big players, that provide the really large modular projects, to Colorado historically. There's a company out in Nebraska called Bonnevilla. They send a ton of product to Colorado. These guys do single-story, single-family homes, not two, but single-story, single-family homes really well as kind of like those smaller multifamilies. They do a really good job with the fourplexes and the eightplexes, things like that. They kind of have that market. Champion, who is also out in Nebraska, who sends a lot of product to us. Champion, low-cost single family. They do it really well. They kind of look a little bit like double wides at times, but if you're looking to put up you know, a lot of low cost, like middle income or for sale, middle income type of product. Champion's definitely your low cost provider in the single story, single family front. North Star and Heritage. These are, I buy a lot from these two. I can speak for them. They're great companies. They're great people. And they kind of specialize in a little bit more customizable stuff. You know, Heritage is the one that has the 27 different cabinetry choices. But they also do a really good job with kind of those medium-sized multifamily, that bigger greenish multifamily that we showed you earlier. That was actually a Heritage product. Those were townhomes. I think that was an eight townhome unit building. And the last one, Fading West, you know, our local, you know, kind of our larger local provider. Fading West is kind of really actually innovated. They have kind of this pre-designed um, pod system, for lack of a better way to say it, where, you know, you can take these 8 pieces and arrange them in different ways to make a 4-bedroom house or an apartment building. It's kind of like I call it adult Legos, where you can kind of pick and choose and make these different configurations. And those they do the drafting in-house for now. But if you want to do something custom, like multifamily, that's when they partner with EV Studios that we talked about earlier. So that's kind of a summary of kind of the larger factories, you know, that are servicing Colorado, that if you wanted to consider a modular project, I would kind of, you know, this would kind of be where I would start. And so here's the resources that we've all talked about in our presentations. We have the financing contact for the regional Division of Housing representatives, you know, for questions on Division of Housing funding options. We have SAMS on there for, you know, the Office of Regulatory Oversight, tiny homes, modular program, plan review, all that kind of stuff. Jack Tybout is the program manager at OEdit for the IHIP program. That IHIP program is the per unit incentive program, as well as the factory revolving debt program. For Proposition 123, there's a whole website for that. Tell you everything you can want to know about Proposition 123. Most of you probably familiar with that. Here's a link to that McKinsey study that talks about the benefits of modular housing, and then my contact information to wrap it up. And that takes us to the end.
Now you had a question about how, or Sam already addressed 3D printing.
Yeah, so we had a question on 3D printing and how does it fit within all this. I put an answer in the chat. 3D printing is built on site. They take the machinery out there. It's all done on site. It's local jurisdiction, locally inspected. You have to go through the local permit process and the construction process with the local jurisdiction.
Yeah, so it's not modular, but
it's
as I mentioned,
modular. Yeah,
as
I'm
I
sorry,
mentioned,
no, but it's innovative, right? So
correct. As I mentioned earlier, it's considered innovative housing, so you can still get funding through the OEdit IHIP program for that particular model of housing, but it's not considered modular for the very reason Sam stated. That work is actually done on site and is under the jurisdiction of the local building department.
One of the things that
on
we
slides.
Yeah, I'll get those over to Housing Colorado, and they can distribute. One of the things that we'd like to invite is, this was a dry run of a presentation that came together about 4 hours ago, and we'd like to know what we didn't cover. What would you have liked to heard more about? What we missed entirely, so that we can, you know, kind of add to it, remove from it for the conference.
And speaking from Housing Colorado's side, we will go ahead and get the slides out to everyone and also include the email addresses for all of the presenters so that you can send any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask or any feedback on the presentation that they might use to fine tune their presentation for the upcoming conference.
Be great.
We do also have somebody with their hand raised. I'm going to allow them permission to speak.
Thank you for the permission. So I know you probably don't want to be in the business of giving opinions, gentlemen, and yet that's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm with CHAFA, and I work primarily with single family, home loan programs. And of course, everyone's talking about ADUs in the industry. So I'm just really interested if you have any successful experiences or things that you can share in terms of someone wanting to place an ADU on their property. Do you have opinions about, would it be better to go modular or using this new tiny home statute, or what type of housing? Because stick built to me just seems always too cost prohibitive. And so we're always looking at, well, what is the most affordable thing that someone could actually do if they wanted to put up an ADU?
So I can tell you from the Elbert County side, when I was county manager there was a lot of discussion from county commissioners on allowing ADUs. And what we found is that a lot of our homes were multi-generational already, and that an ADU would provide additional capacity to get that teenage son who you're tired of living in your house. I have one. He's ready to turn 17, and maybe an ADU is a possibility, right? And so it didn't come down in the discussion with Elbert County on the type of unit. It got to be a density question, and well, if we're going to allow these, what size do we allow? Do we allow half the size of the original dwelling? Do we allow 400 square feet or more, 401? Because there's tiny houses out there too that are also defined as modular, but they're under 400 square feet, built to the same code. I'm not going to base an opinion or provide an opinion on the cost of production. I don't know that. I do know that if you allow ADUs, it's going to come down to what is acceptable in the local area for size and type, and whether it's modular or a tiny home. And I'll pass it over to my other two presenters.
I don't have much of an opinion on which way you should go, other than the fact that I do believe that this construction method, being modular or tiny home, probably lends itself to an ADU environment a little bit more so than stick built, just because it can be completely contained and built to completion at the factory with all the benefits that go along with that. One of the things that I think, in the years to come in our state, that we will probably see a fair bit of, ADU laws, adopted or things like that. And it'll be interesting to see how this industry can kind of step up and hopefully serve that demand.
Thank you. And we do have one other question. I'm going to switch permission over to Lucinda. Lucinda, did you have a question? You have your hand raised, but you are also muted.
No question, thank you.
Okay, got
it. Well, please let us know what we can do to make this better. Please take something out, put something in, add to this, add to that. Happy to listen to all that. So
great. Thank you so much to our presenters. This has been wildly informative, and we really look forward to seeing this presentation at the conference as well. And as mentioned, I will get the slides and have those sent out to all attendees. And if you have any questions, I'll also include the email addresses of each presenter, or you can respond to me directly and I can pass it along. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing this exciting new landscape develop.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.